Gardner, what were you doing when you were 13?
Well, besides the typical babysitting stuff, there was actually something that was different that I think made me grow up a little quickly. My parents had a very dear friend who, her and her husband had bought Bleecker Street Cinema in the Village, in Greenwich Village. Mm-hmm. They bought it, they renovated it, and they showed on Thursday through Sunday, they showed old movies, like Betty Davis movies and all old movies, and they needed a cashier ticket girl. And they were nervous to just hire anybody because you were handling cash. Uh-huh. Of course, then everything was cash, right?
Yeah.
So they spoke with my parents. I used to babysit their kids, and they knew my parents. They knew me well, and they spoke to my parents and spoke to me and said, on Saturdays and Sundays, will you work at the cinema? And at 13, I was on the train, and I'd get off at Penn Station, and I'd have to take the subway down to, to Bleecker Street, and it was an eye-opener, Jim, an eye-opener. I was a girl in Queens, but still, young and a little sheltered. So that was my first job. And that was very, I had to be there. I opened the door with them. I sold the tickets.
Yeah.
I ushered everybody down the aisle. Okay.
Wow.
And in the Village, you have no idea what I used to see in the aisle in the dark. Oh, my God. But anyway,
well,
different story.
Again, I'm not going to do the math, but I know what New York was like 20 years ago and beyond. So I'm sure you saw a lot.
Oh, yeah. I grew up pretty quick from that job, let me tell you.
I'm sure you did. I love the opportunities that come our way through our efforts that we do every day without thinking about it. It sounds like, you were a good kid, you did a good job babysitting, and that message resonated beyond into an opportunity because somebody felt you were trustworthy enough to do a job. I think oftentimes we forget how important our actions are every single day, whether we're an adolescent, teenager, or even an adult in our 50s, that, we're making an impact on people every day, and people are watching.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that I try very hard, even with my own children, to make sure everybody if I had to get a job at 13, my kids at 13 and 14 had to find a job and do something part-time, and make sure and keep their eye on school. But the reason that was so important was to make sure that they understood you have to show up. You have to show up on time. Somebody's depending on you. I would tell my kids, unless you're bleeding to death, you better show up at your job. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, and if I tell you, they still talk about that, and they're in their 20s. So.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. To get back to your career a little bit, I would love to hear what the shoe industry was like at the time that you were at the height of your career. I mean, I would imagine almost everybody is familiar with the name Steve Madden. I know there was a day that his shoes are still very big, but that was a pinnacle at some point. And I'd love to hear about your career during those years.
Yeah, I was fortunate. I was probably in the heyday, Jim, of the fashion industry as far as, the top retailers. I mean, we sold lots of shoes to Saks and Bloomingdale's and Macy's and now many stores that aren't even around anymore. And it was really the height of I would say the height of retail. That was a time that even when the economy was up and down, people were spending money. They were shopping. They were in stores. It's different today. I'm not saying they're not doing that. They're just doing it differently today. Mm-hmm. Today they're doing it over the internet. At that time, we were in the stores. We were, making sure our collections looked beautiful. We were, we had a responsibility not only to the brand we sold, but we had a responsibility to the retailer we sold it to. And our teams would go in and make sure that, everything was pristine. And I mean, they still do that today. I'm not saying they don't, but it was different then because there were many more retailers out there and there was a lot of business to be had. That's kind of shrunk. And that does lead me to one of the reasons I had decided to shift gears and make a change.
Mm-hmm. I feel like, my career at Kettle One Vodka as a brand, there was a time, as you mentioned, brand names were so big and it carried so much responsibility as an employee of that company. And I know that Steve Madden was no different. You represented that company, that brand in a big way. And what that was all about. I feel like we've gotten away from the strength of big brands because there's so many boutique or craft smaller companies coming out, and I love having craft products and that small town item. But the weight that was on your shoulders, I would imagine, representing Steve Madden and the product line was probably tremendous.
Well, I worked for Steve. I know Steve way back in my shoe career. We go back long time. We were actually selling shoes in shoe stores at the same time. That's how I know him. But the thing about that is the umbrella of Steve Madden. I ran 3 divisions, and one of the divisions was the Elizabeth and James brand, which is Mary-Kate Ashley Olsen's brand. Mm-hmm. That was what Steve hired me to do because I had come from startups in my career before. I was always the one that a company would or a president would say, "Yeah, give it to her. She'll do it." So I did a lot of startups, and Steve knew that. So he actually hired me for that brand. And then as we went on, I took care of 2 other brands, the Superga brand and another brand for him under a private label. So the Steve Madden umbrella, so it wasn't, directly for that line, but it was for the 3 other divisions. So it was a powerful company that held a lot of weight. But he also was a hard worker that came from where I came from. So we had a lot of synergy in that way.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us, just because I think it's fun to dip into that time period in the fashion industry, can you give us any big success story or a tough sale that you landed and, everything turned out all right, or a game changer within your career?
Oh, the one game changer I'll never forget, and it was before the Steve Madden career. It was actually when I was in wholesale sales with the company that I was with for 17 years. I had opened with my brand, Saks Fifth Avenue, and, we went from, it was a 3-store test, and the brand was doing amazing, and we were kind of at the height of what was happening there. And I'll never forget, I was sitting in a meeting, and I went into the meeting saying, I'm going to ask for a stretch goal. I'm going to ask for a bigger order. And, you have to be careful, and you come from sales, I'm sure you know, how you actually ask for that and what is expected when you ask for that. And I was able to position a boot order, because our boots were the thing at the time, mm-hmm. a boot order as a special delivery period for them. And because I was able to do that, and again, I spoke to my designer and spoke to head of production, and, I had to make sure I could deliver that. But because I was able to deliver that special boot collection, different timing than the competitors, they loved it, they bought into it, and they right then and there rolled us out to like 45 stores. Wow. From 3 stores. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that was a big one. I'll never forget it.
Just having confidence in your product and your ability to deliver oftentimes is what resonates in those types of deals.
Yeah, and you know what else? One thing I did learn in my career, whether it's now what I do right now or what I did then, you need to look for the void. You need to look at what other people are not doing. And because our competitors, when they were not doing that, I was able to fill the void and get the order. Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you, what got you out of the fashion industry? I know you mentioned it was starting to change. And did you step away from business entirely, or did you jump right into what you're doing now?
No, so I was still with Steve Madden, and I I was one of 10 presidents, and I reported into the vice president of wholesale. All 10 of us did. And her job got big, and they split her job up, and I now was not reporting to her, I was reporting to somebody else, and I actually loved reporting to her. And by the way, she was 15 years younger than me, but smart and amazing, and we had a lot of the same vision, so she was great. And then they split her job up, and I started reporting myself and a few other people into someone else. And it wasn't working for me. I mean, we didn't have the same vision, we didn't have the same ideas, and I'm looking at this, and it was somebody who also didn't have my experience, which didn't bother me, but it did bother me that we couldn't seem to be on the same page. And I was doing this for so long. And already, Jim, in the back of my mind, already watching the industry change, watching, retailers closing and watching what was happening, I said, I need to do something else. There's got to be something else. And I did start looking into franchises. I was looking for about a year, and I was looking like crazy. I mean, I knew Lawn Doctor wouldn't do it for me, and forgive me, I'm sorry, the Lawn Doctor people, but I needed to find a brand. I needed to find something I could connect to. Mm-hmm. And because I was in the fashion industry, I really needed something that, spoke to me in that way. And the craziest thing, I would have 8 o'clock meetings in the morning. I'd have them with production, with sales, with marketing, with design, and a couple of meetings we had each week was with design and with marketing. And the head of our marketing department used to come in at 8 o'clock in the morning, 8:15 in the morning. She had gorgeous red hair. All of a sudden, with this gorgeous red hair, all blown out and beautiful. And I looked at her and I go, wait a minute. It's 8:15 in the morning. Where'd you get that hair? You didn't have it last night at 6 o'clock when I saw you.
Yeah.
She's like, oh, yeah. Yeah, I went to a blow dry bar. I go, blow dry bar? I go, what's that? And that was it. She explained what it was. At the time, I opened my first locations almost 6.5 years ago. So let's just go back. You're talking 5.5 years ago, 6 years ago, and there was nobody knew what a blow dry bar was. I mean, I certainly didn't know, and I started doing my homework, and I visited where she was, and that weekend I started Googling, and all of a sudden, it all kind of came up, and as I was researching, and I literally spent all weekend researching it, Blo Blow Dry bar came up, and then what I realized was Blo was the original blow dry bar. And Blo was a Canadian-based company with an amazing story. And I read about the founder, and I just was amazed. And I said, oh, my God, this is brilliant. Brilliant. It's completely – remember, Jim, I said to fill a void?
Yeah.
I said, in my mind, this fills a void.
Sure.
This is an express service. This is like in and out, get your hair blown out, wash and blow, styling. Yeah. You're not spending hours in a salon, which is okay. That's okay. But you know what? You don't always want to spend hours in a salon. So I thought the concept was brilliant. I literally, on the website, typed in all my information. They called me the next day, 9 a.m. on Monday or 9:30 on Monday morning, and I spoke to the head of operations for 2 hours on the phone. And her and I just clicked. And she loved that I came from the fashion business, and I loved that it was the beauty industry. And I said to her, beauty and fashion go hand in hand. I mean, we do runway work in the fashion business. I mean, it just made so much sense to me.
Yeah.
And at that time, I mean, it was a very young company. It's a much bigger company today.
I want to ask you before we get too far away from it. You said you spent a lot of time looking into franchises. And, I'd love to add some value today with that search because I'm an entrepreneur. I don't own any franchises, nor have I thought about it, but I always see ads, top franchises in the U.S. Very good friend of mine has the rights to the UPS store franchise out here in California. He's opening up 15 stores right now with different people that bought in. So I know there's a tremendous amount of value, but there seems like there's so many opportunities. How do you go about a franchise search? And, to me, sometimes it feels like BS what they're offering, but yet you found one that's a success to you. What's that process like? Because I think people are wondering oftentimes when they see those ads.
Well, I mean, I came from brands. Being in the fashion industry, it is all about brands. Mm-hmm. It is all about the power of a brand. So to me, finding a brand that, had a voice and had meaning and was important. Now, this was a young brand when I looked at it, but I liked the message. I liked how it felt. I liked what they stood for. I liked the idea of their feeling of making women feel great, women empowerment. I mean, that was a message that came across to me right away when I spoke with them and I looked at the brand. So you know what? It spoke to me. Mm-hmm. I think that's really what I'm going to say. It has to speak to you. It has to feel right to you. I was also fortunate because it was a young brand. So because they were young, they embraced my background. Mm-hmm. They embraced my fashion background. They embraced my business background. Even today, I opened my first location. There was only 30 when I opened. Today there's 100.